This conference will now be recorded.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Kara Earhart. I'm the Justice Ministries Program Assistant with the Presbyterian Church in Canada. I'm really happy to be sharing this webinar with you today on justice and self-care in a time of pandemic. We're going to start with just a few quick housekeeping items that I've shared with most of you already, but in case there's anyone joining us as I'm speaking right now, these will be some helpful tips to keep in mind. So the webinar is being recorded and will be made available later at presbyterian.ca/webinars/previous-webinars. Catherine, I think, will be adding this link in the chat function as well, so you can go back and find it later if you need it, or if you want to share it with a friend. All of you are doing great right now by keeping your microphones off. This helps us reduce background noise and just keeps it so that we can have as easy of a flowing a conversation as possible. There will be times where I might ask you to share some feedback or ideas. You can do this either by turning on your microphone or by submitting some responses in the chat function. So what are we talking about today? I want to go through a few different things. By the end of this, I hope you'll be able to answer some of the following questions. So the first one being, what is self-care? We're going to talk about this in a really broad sense, and then also talk about how self-care relates to faith and justice, and looking at that in a very broad sense in our daily lives. But also, the last thing I want you to walk away with is ways that you can incorporate self-care into your daily lives, and especially in times of crisis or in times like this, where we're currently facing a pandemic on a global scale. So these will be ways for you to kind of carry that forward in your life for the next while, and also when things are a little bit more back to normal. Some disclaimers before we get started. I just want to, kind of give you a sense of who I am and position myself in this. I'm not a mental health professional, so I'm not licensed to give specific advice or to help in crisis situations. I do have past experiences providing peer support when it comes to mental health. So I have training in those realms, and over the past several years, I've been working with Justice Ministries, in particular with work related to healing and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, talking about residential school experiences and colonization. And so I've learned a lot through that about mental health and trauma. So what I've done with this webinar is I've tried to bring some of my own personal experiences to this and research best practices as well. Some of the advice that I'll offer, is what works for me, but it may not work for you. And I really don't want people to walk away thinking that these are the only ways that you can practice self-care or the only ways that self-care is useful. We want to keep this with a spirit of curiosity and creativity, and knowing that this will be different for everyone. If by chance you are currently someone who's experiencing crisis, I would encourage you to get off of this webinar now and seek help. I've got some resources up on the screen. I think Catherine will share them in the chat function as well. Come back to this when you're in a better place. I don't expect too much of what we'll talk about will be particularly triggering today, but if you are needing help directly, this maybe isn't the space right now. That said, as well, if at any time you feel you need to leave the webinar and take care of yourself or go seek help from someone else, that's totally fine. Like I said, it will be recorded and available for you later. All right, so what is self-care? Self-care is any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of our health and our well-being. Self-care can be helpful for improving our mood and reducing levels of stress and anxiety. These things are really helpful right now, but also generally in life. I like to think about self-care as well as developing a sense of resiliency. And so it's the tools that you can have in your back pocket to help you in times that are hard, but also to keep you in a space of wellness and health just in day-to-day life. I also really firmly believe that self-care is a practice. It takes effort, it takes work, it takes time to cultivate and stay accountable to what works for you. I don't know that there is such a thing as perfect self-care in the sense that you're always going to get it 100% right or have all of the answers. So these are some things to keep in mind as we go forward. So we're gonna take a quick second to have some feedback from you. Before I give you some examples, I'm curious to know, maybe for now, we'll just use the chat function. Based on that definition I just gave you, what are some activities that you do that help to restore your energy and give you a sense of renewal? Okay, I'll read some of these as they're coming in. So playing soothing classical music, walking, prayer, sacred music. I am also someone who appreciates music as a form of self-care. Any other examples that we want to share right now? Taking a shower, taking a bath. Yes. These are also really great examples. Some long walks and connecting with people. These are great. Some of the examples that I came up with could be reading a book. I think it's important to get time away from our screens when we can. You know, I've personally been finding this really, really hard over the past couple of weeks of mostly being in a sense of self-isolation in my home. And it's, you know, there's this tendency to want to stay connected all the time through our technology. And sometimes you do just need to turn it off and give yourself a quiet moment with a book or some crafts or something to keep you occupied and give your eyes a bit of a break too. Our screens can be really harmful to our physical health through being bad for our eyes. So exercising came up as an example, taking a walk, cycling, doing some stretching. Right now it's important to think about how we can get exercise in maybe newer, different ways that are focused mostly within our homes so that we're, you know, practicing care for ourselves and others by reducing exposure to potential germs or to coronavirus. Making music, praying, meditating, breathing exercises. Another one of these things as part of our, you know, serving our physical needs is eating a good meal. You know, something that concerns me right now with how people are talking about things like quarantine or self-isolation online is, you know, right now there might be people saying, oh, this is a great time to work on your diet. I don't think that that's true. I don't think that practicing good self-care right now is thinking about dieting in that sense. So I really want to put that as an affirmation out there, especially if any of you are people who've had trouble with food or with disordered eating. These messages are harmful. I think it's important when we're in times like this that we're, you know, nourishing our bodies with food that's good for us, but also that comforts us, that makes us feel full. And these things are really good for kind of soothing the nervous system. Sleeping is another act of self-care, whether it's making sure you're getting enough sleep through the night or taking short naps in the day if you need them. These are all just a few examples. I think one of the examples in the chat function that came up that I think is so important is taking a bath or taking a shower. I'll get into this a little bit more in a bit, but one of the things that we can often experience in times like this is certain forgetfulness, or especially as we're maybe not leaving our house as much, it can seem easier to forget things like brushing your teeth and taking a shower. And the impact that those can have on how you feel is really surprising sometimes. So just making sure that you keep tending to that is really important. Self-care can be so many things. I also want to talk about what it's not. It does not have to be expensive. I really want to make sure that if you walk away with one thing, that some of these are on your list. Self-care does not have to cost a lot of money. It should not be, it doesn't have to be thought of as something that's self-indulgent. I think that self-care, honestly, a lot of the time is thinking about some of the basic things that we need. And you know, sometimes that's taking a bubble bath, but that may not be, you know, the priority for you right now in your self-care. Another critique that can come up with self-care is, oh, it's a free pass to slip off your responsibilities. I don't think that that's true either. That's not really what practicing self-care looks like. There can be sometimes these common ideas that practicing self-care could look like spending a whole day on the couch doing nothing and relaxing. And that might be true sometimes, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes self-care looks like filing your taxes because that relieves the pressure of thinking of that one stressful thing that is still existing in this corner that you have to deal with. Sometimes self-care looks like cooking a meal even when you don't want to, or you know, making sure that you've dealt with other tasks that maybe aren't glamorous, that aren't fun, but are necessary for keeping us in a good place. I don't think self-care should be one size fits all either. Like I said, what works for me may not work for you. It's recognizing that we all have different needs. Some of them will be the same, like we all need food, we all need water, we all need sleep. But how we practice that isn't going to look the same for everyone. So I think it's important to make space for that understanding. And this last point, I don't think self-care is always stuff that we do alone. One of the comments that came up was connecting with people. You know, this is really good news for extroverts. I think sometimes self-care does look like scheduling time to have a regular check-in with a friend or a family member. And I think that especially for parents or caregivers who might be watching this, it's important to exercise self-care to model it for the children in our lives and teach them to have some of these tools as well and develop some of this resiliency. So there are ways, and especially in times like these where we have more physical distancing to keep each other safe, where some ways of practicing self-care will involve other people. As we think about self-care, I want us to also think about it in a bit more of a holistic way. And one of the ways to do that is looking at kind of 4 different components of health and well-being, being physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. These are teachings that I personally draw from Indigenous, particularly First Nations, medicine wheel conceptions of the self and the different ways that we need to stay healthy. And realizing that these things are distinct, they're separate from each other, but they're also interrelated. So some things that we do for our physical health also help our mental health, or also help, say, our spiritual health, and vice versa. So when we're talking about physical health, that can mean concerns about physical safety, having shelter, having food, having water, you know, cleaning your body, exercising your body, things like that. Mental health and emotional health are a little trickier to distinguish from each other sometimes. But when I think about mental health, I'm thinking and talking mostly about abilities to process information and situations. Mental health can be related to things like focus, the ability to store memories. It can be related to energy levels. Whereas emotional health is our ability to internally and externally express our feelings, and how do we do that in a way that is appropriate? Do we have the ability to do that in ways that are appropriate? Can we, you know, from the mental side of things, take information that we have or experiences that we're having, recognize what our emotions are, and then react appropriately. So those are pretty connected components, but also a little different. And then our spiritual health. So how is our connection with God? Are we feeling kind of that fulfillment that comes through our faith? and tending that as well. I think especially as Christians, a lot of us probably are already doing some of that spiritual self-care, and that's more intuitive to us. Knowing all of these things, it's important to, as best as possible, keep a balance in how we are caring for these 4 different kinds of health. If you're only working on your physical health and not looking after the other 3, there's going to be some problems that arise. So keeping some perspective on that and an eye for balance is helpful. All right, as I said, if you have a personal faith practice, you are probably already practicing self-care in some way or another. Prayer came up in the chat function as something that people exercise as self-care. Maintaining these spiritual practices can really enrich your self-care practice and contribute to your well-being. Some of the benefits of looking after your spiritual health might include reducing stress, and that's been shown to reduce blood pressure, so that's good for your physical health as well. Improving your mood and having a better sense of connection with others. And so I think it's important for us to really continue thinking about how self-care has a role in our faith life as Christians. It's not a separate thing. It doesn't have to be a secular thing either. I think that we can hold the faith practices and teachings that we know about self-care, and also hold some of those secular ideas as well. And what can we learn from both and share with both? I'm going to take a quick second for water. If there's any questions coming in on the chat function, now might be a good time to share some. Okay, let's continue. So while anyone can use self-care, the reason that we wanted to do this webinar as Justice Ministries is that we think that self-care is especially relevant to justice seekers for a couple of reasons. If you are someone who cares a lot about justice and have kind of a deep sense of empathy, you may be more prone to feelings of anxiety, depression, or hopelessness because of the suffering that you see in the world, or that you might experience yourself. It can be really overwhelming sometimes thinking about the long-standing nature of certain forms of oppression, how ingrained certain systems are in the way that the world works and the ways that we relate to each other as people. And if we're not finding ways to process that anxiety or the hopelessness, it can become a really heavy burden and make it challenging to take care of yourself and to feel well. Some of the sense of long-standing urgency, when you're caring about these justice issues where people might be in crisis for a long time, it also means that you might be more likely to put others' needs before your own. There might be feelings of guilt associated with trying to take care of yourself, and this can lead to risking your own health. Whether that's, adding to really severe senses of anxiety or depression, or whether it means, working so hard that you aren't sleeping enough. And these things are really challenging and make it more difficult to continue engaging in justice work. Did Jesus practice self-care? I think is an interesting question. And it's helpful for us as Christians to take a look at the Bible with a lens of looking for self-care. Where do we see that being practiced? Where do we have examples of it? A friend sent me a couple of passages to look at where, Jesus just runs off to the hills and has to take that time and say, you know what, the crowds are gone. I'm going to the mountains. I'm here to pray. I've got to go talk to God. And while we could look at these examples, and I've got a couple on the screen of Jesus simply practicing spiritual care, or engaging in spirituality, engaging in prayer, I think it's really interesting and a worthwhile thought experiment to spend some time questioning, what must it felt like for Jesus to be performing these miracles? You know, this Matthew 14:23 passage comes after the feeding of the 5,000. What kind of energy does that take? What might Jesus have been feeling and thinking and experiencing? And you know, what did Jesus do to take care of himself? You know, some of that spiritual food comes from our relationships with God, and Jesus would have had that as well. But you know, we're not reading the scriptures and seeing examples of Jesus doing push-ups to feel better. But I think it's interesting to think about, and it's worthwhile to remember as we're looking after ourselves and trying to make more space for that in our lives, that we do have really faithful examples of people who have already shown us how to take care of ourselves. As I was preparing for this webinar, I also kept coming across in my memory, thinking that I had seen a story about God telling Elijah to eat some food and take a nap, and thinking that that was really funny. And so I spent a little bit of time revisiting that story leading up to this, and I'll try to read for you this. Trying to see if I can move that. There we go. I'm going to see if I can read for you the tweet that's on the slide right now. This is your gentle reminder that one time in the Bible, Elijah was like, God, I am so mad I want to die. And so God said, here's some food. Why don't you have a nap? So Elijah slept, ate, and decided things weren't so bad. Never underestimate the spiritual power of a nap and a snack. And while I think that this is, you know, kind of cute and funny, when you actually dive into the text, and it is a bit of a lengthier passage, so it's worthwhile looking at that for yourself. I think there is a lot of truth to it, that, you know, this wisdom that if you don't get up and eat, this journey will be too much for you. If you're not taking care of these basic needs, it's going to be too much. You've got to take breaks. You've got to work on that sense of renewal in all of those different ways that feed you. Before we go on, I want to talk a bit about a few principles of self-care that I try to incorporate in the way that I think about it, and that might be useful for you. Again, they might not be. These are all offerings to you, and if they're helpful, that's great. The first one is mindfulness. And now mindfulness is the sense of being fully present and drawing attention to one's own experiences, generally with carrying a suspension of judgment for those feelings and those experiences. As you're thinking about self-care and what you might need to work on in your life, it's about checking in with yourself and being honest. You know, how are you doing and what are you feeling? And then how can you respond to that? I think there's a lot of power in being able to name something, and then just see if you can do something with it from there. Compassion is another word and another practice that I really appreciate. So it's that sense of kindness and gentleness. When you're thinking about self-care, you know, compassion is something that I hope you'll think about in terms of self-compassion. Like, how do you extend the same kindness and gentleness to yourself that you might to someone else? You know, for example, what kind of kindness or gentleness do you extend to a child? Can you extend that same to yourself? And so again, it's about suspending judgment, allowing yourself permission to not always get everything right, and not always have things perfect, not always know what to do. As you foster this practice for yourself, by extension, it's easier and it becomes more possible to offer that to other people. I think it's reciprocal in that way. And I think curiosity. With curiosity comes, I think, flexibility, and creativity. So continuing to explore how you respond to different personal tests of self-care. You know, maybe that's, I don't think that I'm a very active person, but I'm going to try going for a run and seeing if that does actually make you feel better or not. And do you have room in your life to keep testing that and keep giving that a shot? And sometimes the answer will be no. Sometimes you don't have space for curiosity because you just need to know, if I do X, Y, Z, I will feel better. So there's some room for that as well. Why is self-care especially important right now? There's a few things that I've come up with. You might have your own answers as well. Times of crisis, like the pandemic that we're going through right now, that we're living through right now, can bring about heightened or numbed emotions. It can go either ways. It can go both ways, depending on the day. I think the habits and patterns we form in times of crisis are likely to follow us when we're out of crisis mode. You know, some things to keep in mind are, you know, as we live through these difficult times together, we will likely be seeing more experiences of grief and trauma. And how do we develop, again, healthy resiliency to interact and interface with these challenging times, and some experiences that may be new for us and some that may be old and bring up bad memories or bad feelings. Self-care is also really important, again, especially for justice seekers right now, because there are calls around us for increased community support. And many of us are already running on fewer resources than usual. So we're being asked to do more with less. And I would say for a lot of people too, our usual forms of care may be more difficult to access than usual right now. Again, I'm looking at my extrovert friends. If one of the ways that you get care and feel good about yourself in your life is spending time physically around other people, you may need to think about other ways that you can access self-care on your own, just to adapt to what's going on right now. I want to talk a little bit about some of the potential responses that you might be feeling right now, and acknowledge those. These are only a few. There could be many, many more. So some of those being stress. A lot of people are worried about jobs right now, and concerned about what's going to happen if this lasts more than a few weeks. It's a lot of grief, you know. So many of us had plans for what the next, you know, weeks and months of our lives would look like. And what does it mean to lose some of those opportunities or have to rethink them? There's a really great article I was looking at that talks about what grief looks like right now. And we may not realize it as grief because maybe nothing really bad has happened yet. And there's kind of that sense of anticipatory grief. If you've experienced grief, whether it's in the recent past or even long ago, you might be feeling that grief resurfacing. So that could be something that's happening. Anxiety, like I said, numbness to emotions could be something that you're feeling. You could be revisiting experiences of trauma. You might have physical pain or discomfort. You know, your digestive system may not be working like it normally does. So keeping that in mind. Feelings of fear. And Allison Carr gave a really great webinar on Monday talking about fear and justice in a time of pandemic that I'd encourage you to check out. Other things like memory loss, forgetfulness. I think I mentioned earlier, you know, right now you might be forgetting to brush your teeth in the morning and wondering by noon, why do I feel a little bit gross today? Maybe no one else is feeling that. Maybe it's just me. But knowing that these things could happen, again, if you can name these feelings that you're having, maybe you can do something with that. Other possible responses could be fatigue, mood swings, disassociation. You could be more irritable than usual. So knowing that these are experiences that could be coming up for us, it's learning how do we tend to them and how do we recognize when they're happening, and again, have compassion for ourselves to say, okay, I see what's going on, and try not to judge those emotions. It's not your fault for feeling these ways, and you can figure out tools to work through them. You may also experience joy, humor, a new sense of gratitude, empathy, compassion, hope, a deeper closeness with God, or a sense of friendship, family, community. You could be taking time in more isolation if you have that ability to embrace slowness. You might be enjoying some serenity. Things are a little quieter than usual. I was talking to a friend last night, and she was sharing some experiences of friends who are more introverted and saying, you know, even some people who are more introverted and have anxiety are actually feeling pretty okay right now because they have experiences already of knowing what they need to do in order to cope in times of high stress, because they're dealing with high stress all the time. But right now, they're also having space where they don't have to go and see other people while they're dealing with that stress. So that could be happening as well. You could be facing good surprises in your life. You could be getting good news. You may be feeling more love or more kindness right now. So as much as there are these negative and scary things happening, there can also be these uplifting things and positive feelings. And you might feel guilty about that. You might feel guilty for feeling okay. And so the next slide I have, I want to just present a few offerings of affirmations, or you could even practice these as breath prayers if you wanted. You know, it's okay to not be doing okay. These are strange times, and it's okay to be doing okay. That's great. You know, if you're doing okay, if you're not feeling stressed or feeling troubled, you know, that's all right. And maybe that means you're better able to help other people out. It is okay to ask for help. Even if you feel that you're in a position of privilege or feeling lucky, or that you have, you know, most of what you need, if you're still struggling with grief or any of those other challenging emotions, it's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to name your needs. So I want you to keep some of these in mind going through these next weeks, potentially the next months, and, you know, through the rest of your life. Sometimes reminding yourself of these things is a powerful action itself, and can be really helpful for grounding and for making sure you're taking care of yourself. One of the other ways that self-care really fits in with justice for me is expanding to a broader sense of community care. Allison used this analogy in her webinar on Monday, and I'd already planned to use it in my slides, so I still will. But you can think about self-care in terms of the announcements they give you when you board a flight, that if there's an emergency, if something bad is to happen, please put on your own oxygen mask before you help someone else. When we are well, we are better able to care for each other. And one of the things I've been really thinking and experiencing these past couple of days and weeks is, when you are taking the time to be good to yourself, to care for yourself, you are more able to hear where God is calling you, and where you can be of help. So often I think we spend time going and feeling like we need to move to the next thing, or that were needed in so many places. And it's been helpful for me to remind myself that I also need quiet time, or time taking care of myself, to integrate the things that I'm learning and to really deepen my understanding of those things. And then doing that can help me be more effective at helping other people. So that's one of the things that I think is really important to think about, especially if you're resistant to the idea of self-care, which I hope you're not if you're watching this, but it could happen to you. So yeah, that thinking of when you're well, you're better able to care for others. Another part of community care that I think we're really lucky to be part of church communities is that healthy churches and healthy justice movements really understand the importance and possibilities for community care. One of the things, the next point I have here is that we're at our best when we take turns carrying the load, or taking turns flying at the front of the flock. I'm not a biologist, I don't study birds. But we hear these stories about how geese fly in these V formations so that the strongest are at the front, and those who need to take a break or who might be sick are flying towards the back of the V. And it's taking turns to step up and take our places and use our gifts where we can. I think there's some wisdom in learning how to cycle that. A story about community care that is maybe one of the first times I thought about it in a really concrete way is from Patrice Culler's book, When They Call You a Terrorist. It's her memoirs and about the starting of Black Lives Matter, and she talks about a church opening up its doors at the last minute when another venue canceled, to support protesters during the movements in Ferguson in 2014. And the way that church opened its space, one, was really beautiful and wonderful, and two, the way that the organizers of Black Lives Matter at the time put things in place to make sure people were caring for one another while they were out protesting in the streets for days at a time. And so some examples of that is that they had healers present at the church who were offering massage therapy, acupuncture, physiotherapy. They had spaces where people could create art and music together. They had pillows available for people to rest and take naps. And I think that, in all of that too, I'm reading, or I read at the time I was reading this book, I was struck by just how important this community support and spaces for joy are in doing the hard work of justice. And I think that a lot of churches intrinsically know some of this and have some of this wisdom. So as you're thinking about self-care, it's thinking about ways that can extend in community as well. And something I want you to think about going away from today is, how can you coordinate self-care with those who share your responsibilities for community care? Right now, I know a lot of parents are having their children home for the first time in a while, where they have to give extended care. If you're sharing caregiving responsibilities with other parents, or with maybe your parents or other aunts and uncles, are you able to give each other breaks? Are you able to say, this is what I need today. I need some extra time for myself. Can you take the kids for this extra time? In your church, how do you share the load? Do you have a team who does pastoral care so that you can lighten some of your minister's load? Do you have people in session who take particular roles? Do you allow people who are in Christian education to trade off for each other so that they can participate alternately in the Sunday service and in offering Christian ed to children? So all of these are things that we can carry with us going forward. We're coming up to about 15 minutes left of time, so I'm going to be breezing through some stuff a little bit to get to an exercise that I want us to share together. But first, the second part to that Elijah story that I loved, and it's the importance of reading in context. When I was looking up that first tweet, I expanded the thread to see this one, and I'm so glad I did, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't be able to share it with you. But the other thing God did was remind Elijah that he was not the last righteous person on earth. And that question then, how much of our despondence comes from feeling that we are truly alone? Don't give up. You are not the last one. Go and find the righteous remnant and struggle with them. I love that, and I think that that's, again, a really important thing to think about in self-care. You're not alone. You've got that community of people around you. You can form community around you. And we also have God with us, God to journey with us as we process all of the challenges that will come our way. So when you're feeling alone, I think an important self-care practice is to remind yourself of the safety and the care of the people around you. All right, we're going to open up to the chat function briefly because I want us to have a quick conversation before we continue. What are some barriers that you see maybe in your life or in other people's lives to practicing self-care? You can use the chat function to share a couple ideas. If no one shares, I have some that I can talk about myself. Here we go. Okay, responsibilities such as young children or aging parents, the demands of other people on my time, and worse, imagined demands of other people on my time. Okay, feeling like we're not good at slowing down and needing to teach ourselves that more. Depression, absolutely. If you already have an underlying mood or anxiety disorder, it can be really challenging to take these things on. And there's all kinds of complex reasons why depression can get in the way. Yeah, lack of understanding for others, for the need of self-care in the church. Let's see, trying to fill all of the to-do list items that we have. Setting priorities in these confusing times. What do we do first? Yeah. And judgment that maybe you have a weak faith if you're taking the time to practice self-care. I'm extrapolating a little bit. Time is another one. All right, I'm going to bring up my ideas. We've touched on a lot of them, I think. Time being huge. And you all said, like, there are so many things pulling on our time and our energy. Their next exercise coming up, I want to address this a little bit. So we'll keep that in the back of our minds. Money was one that I brought up. As I said earlier, though, I don't think self-care needs to be expensive or to cost any money at all. So we're going to keep that in mind. Worries that will be perceived as selfish. The guilt that can come with taking time for ourselves, especially if we are people who see ourselves as caregivers. Some narratives that we tell ourselves. They could be, as benign as, I'm just not an active person. I don't do physical self-care. Or they could be more extreme to the point of, I'm not worthy. And I really, really want to push back if that is something that is underlying a resistance to self-care in your life. You are a beloved child of God, and just as God cares for all of God's creation, God cares for your well-being. You are worthy. You are enough. Again, these are other affirmations that you can either write down and have up on your wall. Just these little reminders that it's worth it. Another barrier I often see is shame. It can be hard, and this might be a way that you need to say, put a box around the self-care you can do if you're in a time of crisis. It can be really hard to think about the ways that we aren't doing okay, and that can kind of cause a shame spiral of, oh man, I haven't looked after myself properly in so long, and how on earth could I start now? Or how foolish am I for not being able to do this? Or I'm not capable. And I think it's best to try to, if you're having those thoughts, think about what the equal and opposite thought is. If you're thinking, you know, I haven't been able to do this for myself in so long, an equal and opposite is, but I am committing to do it now. Or I am not capable. The equal and opposite is, I am capable, and try and name for yourself ways that you are. In times of uncertainty, it can be helpful for us to feel more in control and prepared by making plans. And so what I want us to do together for a few minutes, I think we have about 5, we can do this for about 5 minutes, is to brainstorm together in the coming weeks, what are some practices for self-care that you can do in under 1 minute, under 5 minutes, in half an hour, or in an hour or more. Do come back to this webinar later, to the recording if you need this. But I'd really encourage each of you to go away and either write out or print out for yourself a little spreadsheet or a list of, for your mental, your emotional, your spiritual, and your physical health, what can you do in these lengths of time? I'm going to structure this conversation by these time increments. Let's start with less than 1 minute. We've got a couple of comments already rolling in, but let's start with less than 1 minute. Our first recommendation is breathe. Yes, definitely breathe. Yep, for 1 minute, you can turn off the phone or close your computer. You can pray in 1 minute. Yep, these are great. For a physical need, get a glass of water. That's one that I would suggest. If you've got access to do that, yep, you can do some stretches in 1 minute. Okay, here's another. Hold an image or something or someone special to me in my mind and heart, and focus on the love I have for that person, that animal, that place, or that thing. Yep, you can walk around the room. Let's expand out to 5 minutes or less. And I want to keep in mind some of these that could be practiced by people who might be still considered doing essential work, whether it's in hospitals or grocery stores. For 5 minutes, name as many things as I can that I'm grateful for. That's great. I think gratitude is super helpful in times like these. Any other 5 minutes or less? I think a lot of these 1 minute or fewer can be expanded as well. Ooh, enjoy a good cup of coffee or tea. Yes, I think that something I've been enjoying lately is brewing a cup of tea, letting it cool a little bit, and just feeling the warmth of it in my hands. If you have a good like pottery mug or something. Smile at other people. Thank the staff at the grocery store. Yes, having some of these things in our mind as here's a challenge. Even if I'm feeling really upset or frustrated or scared, what can I do to set up a 5 minutes of sharing positivity? I think that's great. Here we go. Reciting a poem, a song, or a verse that you find helpful. Having a shower. Maybe a little more than 5 minutes, depending on how long of a shower you take, and the whole process of getting ready and getting out and getting dressed again. But for sure, take care of those basic needs. Brush your teeth. I don't mean that to sound glib. Let's see, physical. Again, you could do some stretching again for 5 minutes or so. Let's expand out to 30 minutes. What can you do in about half an hour? Oh, feed the birds is another short one. I love that. I think that's great. 30 minutes. Take a walk. Yep, as long as it's still considered safe for us to do that. I think that's great. Skipping rope for a full half hour sounds ambitious. Journaling, I think, is wonderful. Sorting rocks or other things that you keep a collection of. Baking or cooking a special meal. Treadmill. Yep, these are all great. Let's maybe get one or two more. Housework. Yep. Listening to music, meditating, great. Writing a card or a letter to someone. I think these acts of like physical writing are so helpful in times like these. A dance party for half an hour also sounds wonderful. Reading, yep. Let's expand out to an hour or more. What is something, say you have 2 free hours that you want to set aside for self-care? Nap. I'd love a 2-hour nap. That sounds joyful. Again, reading a book. Yeah, reading. It could be reading your Bible as well. Doing some Lectio Divina might be a good idea. Playing a board game. Yep. Writing some fiction or poetry. Scrapbooking. Doing a puzzle. Here's an offering of something I've been thinking about with puzzles. Can you think of putting together a puzzle as a prayer practice? For every piece that you set in, can you say a different prayer? Clean something, organize your junk drawer, scrub some grout. I think especially as more of us are having time where we must be in our homes, cleaning the house is, again, one of those non-glamorous but very effective self-care tools. It's hard to feel good about yourself when you are living surrounded by filth or junk, for lack of better words. Washing windows. Oh, wow. You all love to clean. This is great. Now that you get the idea, I do encourage you to do this on your own time as well. And for now, I think we're going to move on to our next slide. I'll share one last one that came in. Watch a movie. My encouragement with watching movies right now is now probably is not the time to watch dystopian fiction or Contagion. Watch movies that will make you feel good. Watch a comedy special. Again, do these things that are going to feed you and fuel you rather than the things that might pick away at the anxieties in your brain. Okay, with our last few minutes, I've just got some final offerings of help and tools that you can use. So some tools for self-soothing. If you're already feeling like you're over capacity, if you're feeling like you're getting close to crisis, coming up with a self-care plan could feel out of reach. So if you need some simpler tasks that can calm you down or bring you down a little faster, to then get you to a place where you can do some more proactive work. Breathing exercises are a good one. Box breathing is an exercise that I know a lot of people enjoy. It's that practice of taking a breath in and then holding for the same amount of time and then breathing out for that same amount of time and holding again for the same amount of time. So that could be 3 seconds. You could expand to 5 or 10 seconds. And again, just focus on your breathing and try to calm your thoughts. Breath prayers or affirmations, I've mentioned a couple times. If you're not familiar with breath prayer, it's that practice of saying a prayer that you can, whether it's one word or a short phrase, that you can utter in kind of the span of a breath, and you might repeat it multiple times. Another great tool for grounding if you're having a panic or an anxiety attack is called the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding exercise. And so it's using your senses to really get situated and remind yourself of where you are. It might be helpful if you are in a safe place that you can reflect on the things that make you safe. But the principle is that you try to notice 5 things around you that you can see. So very deliberately notice 5 things. It could be, there's a water bottle on my desk. There's a plant on my shelf. There's a mug here. So name those 5 things for yourself that you can see. Then do the same for 4 things that you can touch. Try to make those things that are nice, you know, whether it's a warm mug of tea or a soft blanket, or a pet. Spend time with your animals, people. It really helps. Yeah, think of those 4 things you can touch. Listen for 3 things around you. That can be trickier if it's quiet, but try to listen for 3 things. If you can't do that, fewer is fine. And then 2 things you can smell and 1 thing you can taste. So going through from those 5 to the 4 to the 3 to the 2 to the 1 as a way of getting yourself situated are all really helpful. So try these out. If they help for you, that's great. What can be useful as well is to take stock before and after an exercise like this to try and rate how you're feeling overall on a scale of, say, 1 to 5. Rank that before you do it and then after you do it and see if it changes anything. Here we go. Some additional tools for self-care can be found on a posting from OISE at the University of Toronto. They put together a list, I think only published in the past couple of days, for helping people to cope during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the resources include emergency counseling helplines, mindfulness and relaxation techniques and resources, tools for managing anxiety and stress, things to help for coping with things with uncertainty, and some tools and resources at your disposal for promoting social connection and reducing loneliness. The link is here. I think Catherine will also send it in the chat function. If you're feeling like you're in a rut with spiritual care, I just wanted to offer up a couple things that might be helpful. Having a daily prayer book, I think, can be really useful in times like these. The one that I use and really enjoy is called Prayers for a Planetary Pilgrim by Edward Hayes. I think I'd ordered it through Chapters once upon a time. You can probably get it through Amazon as well. If you have local bookstores that are still offering a sale either online or curbside, do support your local businesses. They really need the help. Wild Goose Publications, based out of the Iona community in Scotland, is really wonderful. Justice Ministries has a lot of their resources, and many of their prayer and liturgy books are available as ebooks at their website, ionabooks.com. And a friend of mine also suggested that if you are looking for advice on family and children's prayer practices, Tracy Smith has some really great resources and advice. Again, all of this will be posted later when the webinar is shared online. So if you're struggling to jot it down, it will be available to you later. If you have any questions over the next while or any time really, feel free to contact Justice Ministries. My personal contact is up on the screen right now. The Presbyterian Church in Canada is continuing to update a page on COVID-19 resources that is available for individuals and congregations. On Friday, Catherine Sisk, who's been helping out in the chat bar, is going to be hosting a webinar on March 27th at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, will be about an hour, and this one is on justice and vulnerability in a time of pandemic. It should be really great, so feel free to tune into that as well or follow up afterwards if you can't participate on Friday. If there are any ways that we can be supporting you through the pandemic, please do reach out and let us know. We're continuing to think up resources to try and be helpful, so we'd really love to hear from you. And we're about to close up. I think we're a little over time, so unfortunately I won't take questions right now, but I will encourage you, you can keep your microphones off, but to join me in the following prayer. I've written this as a prayer for individual use to help in times of need. So feel free to use this in the coming weeks or months, adapt it for your own use, share with your congregations, do whatever is helpful. Yeah, for now we're gonna wrap up in prayer. Again, feel free to say this along with me in the comfort of your home, and know that we're lifting up our prayers together as a small community sharing this right now. Loving God, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Just as you know every small detail about the seasons and creatures on this earth, and love to watch the young deer grow and flourish, and care for the birds in their nests, so too do I know you love and care for me. As I move through these challenging days, I look to you for courage and help. The journey towards justice is long, and sometimes I feel tired and alone. There is so much suffering in this world, and sometimes I am helpless to do anything about it. Just as your angel reminded Elijah to pause for food and rest, help me remember to tend to my needs so I can face each day renewed and ready to hear your call. Help me see you in both the chaos and the quiet. May I carry your grace and compassion with me, both for myself and for others. May it be a light to my path when I am weary and when I am well. May your grace strengthen me to seek your justice in the world. All this I lift up to you in the name of your Son, the Prince of Peace. Amen. Thank you all again for joining us today. Do take care as you go about the rest of your day, and hope you're all well. Take care.
Thank you, Kara.